Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's a Monday morning, and in typical fashion, we're looking at South Africa's crumbling economic policy, rising taxes, refugee scandals, and Trump's position with South Africa. But before we get onto the main video of today, if I can yet again remind you, if you haven't already, hit the bell icon, subscribe to the channel, do share it with your friends, and help a brother out. Let's grow the numbers on the channel. So let's start off with the first news story. And this is the news story that Donald Trump has issued a warning to its allies that they should not attend the upcoming UN conference on a two-state solution for Israel and Palestine. The US leaked a diplomatic cable which reveals that the White House is actively discouraging countries from attending the France and Saudi Arabia-led event. Now, for those of you who don't know, France these days pretty much looks like downtown Pakistan, and unfortunately that's meant a change in the political position of France towards, well, the state of Israel. So the Trump administration argues that unilateral recognition of a Palestinian state would coerce Israel during wartime and support its enemies, which is highly likely because one of the things that we're seeing right now in terms of the anti-Israeli sentiment was that many people seem to forget there are still hostages being held, and they haven't been let go of yet. People don't seem to be calling for the release of the hostages, but they do seem to be calling for Israel to forget about its citizens, which it can't because it would be a breach of that social compact. You know, the social compact type thing that Cyril loves to talk about? In any case, France, being Islamist-led now, has said that they are willing to recognize a Palestinian state, despite any form of US objections. And the US has accused the conference of potentially encouraging punitive actions like sanctions or boycotts against Israel. Because that's exactly what they've said they'll do. They said once they recognize Palestine, they're going to sanction Israel for its actions in Palestine, even though Israel is trying to get the release of its citizens. Strange. In any case, the US has sanctioned 4 female judges from the ICC, the International Criminal Court, all who were involved in the issuing of a warrant of arrest for the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. So these judges have all been banned from entering the US and had their American assets frozen. I do find it weird, though, that they had American assets in the first place. Well, South Africa not wanting to be outdone by this, and because obviously our relationship with the US at the moment is just so strong. It's just so strong. Well, they've said that this move by the United States was a direct affront to the principles of the International Court of Justice. Pretoria says it undermines the ICC's independence and the global fight against impunity. South Africa remains a founding member of the ICC and part of the Hague Group supporting the court's mandate. But you see, one of the things that I seem to forget was that the US isn't a fan of all these globalist organizations whilst being led by Donald Trump. And the reason for that is because all of these globalist bodies all appear to be heavily left-leaning and seem to be very inclined to Marxist thinking. Talking of the US, a video has emerged alleging that Afrikaans refugees in the US are destitute. Apparently they're living without food, jobs, and phones and hotels. But the Amerikaners, the organization facilitating the move, insist that the program is functioning exactly as planned. They say that the refugees have received legal work permits, housing, schooling, and medical aid. And within a year, they can apply for permanent residency and even sponsor their families to move to the United States. So this allegation, I don't really know any further on that. But I'll tell you what else is a interesting allegation, and this is the story that Cyril Ramaphosa apparently blames apartheid for the economic decline in South Africa. And it's always the same with these freaking morons. Every single time there's a problem, must be apartheid's fault. Always apartheid's fault. I mean, how else would you describe it? Well, the president of South Africa has again blamed apartheid for the stagnant economy. He insists that BE policies are not the cause of poor economic growth, but rather the solution to historic injustices. He says that black South Africans were historically seen as nothing more than laborers, and now they must become productive economic participants, all while sprouting nonsense about the means of production, as if he somehow thinks that the Communist Manifesto is still relevant in 2025, and sprouting nonsense about the means of production is still relevant. I think Grandpa should really retire at this point. Lest we forget that Cyril Ramaphosa is 72. In a normal corporate environment, this guy would have been put out to pastures already and been made to retire. Instead, we have him sprouting Soviet-era nonsense whilst he attempts to lead a country into economic ruin. Because looking at the economic outlook and the business confidence at the moment, well, business confidence in South Africa apparently remains fragile, with the SACCR, BCR dropping sharply in April, partially recovering in May, and then nosediving again. You see, investor sentiment remains low due to policy instability and low real economic activity. Why is there policy instability? Well, that's because everybody thought that when they voted the ANC out, only for them to be put back in power by the DA, that somehow the DA would fix the broken policy, and that's not what's happened. And so, as a result, we've seen the growth forecast in South Africa drop numerous times, with the latest drop now dropping to, well, 1%. Although even 1% isn't being believed by many individuals, because you see, the current growth rate in South Africa there isn't any, 0% growth. Now, you must understand that a population grows by 2% and the economy grows by 0%. Well, that's an economic decline. That's what we like to call a failed state. But we are assured that, yet again, BEE is really going to save things. Well, the Free Market Foundation reports that BEE has cost the economy 5 trillion rand. Yep, let that figure sink in. 5 trillion rand and 4 million jobs. Yep, it's doing smashing. It claims that BEE reduces GDP by between 2 and 4% every year and enriches only a few hundred politically connected elites, which is pretty much what Professor William Gamede said last week, where he said that there was 1 trillion that had been shuffled between under 100 ANC-linked individuals. All these parties agree that true economic empowerment would fund education, infrastructure, and entrepreneurship, and not elite billionaires that all carry ANC cards. But we all know the answer to this, right? And that's tax the rich, because that's what commies do. They tax the rich because they tax people with money. Except, as you will recall, the National Treasury has admitted that its current budget, where it raised the personal income tax, failed. And that was because the PRT rose to 45%. And what this means is that actually the government collected less money as wealthy taxpayers restructured their income or just left. Because you see, the top 3 tax brackets already pay 60% of all PRT, and a small exodus just cripples the state. And they're getting that exodus. But it's also important to understand that the wealthy aren't wealthy for nothing. They're not stupid. So all they do is they restructure their income so that they're now no longer in the tax brackets. So they don't pay tax. And you see, this has led to the Treasury warning that South Africa could hit the top of the Laffer curve, which means that the higher tax rates now actually shrink revenue. Because you get to this curve where taxes are the most, and people just refuse to pay them. It's almost like a tax boycott. Well, would you know it, that's exactly what we see. People are just structuring themselves away so that they don't pay, because they don't want to pay, because they don't see the point in paying. They get nothing for it. So as a result, revenue is shrinking. Put that in your pipe and smoke at ANC. On to a very final news story, and this is, what exactly does Cyril Ramaphosa plan to achieve by going to the G7 in Canada? Well, apparently, South Africa wants hydrogen to become a key export and enabler of industrial transformation. Oh, I hate hearing that word, transformation. In any case, apparently the barriers to this are lack of capital, because all the banks left, high risk perception, because South Africa is full of crime, and unclear regulatory environment. Pretty sure you can control that, don't you, Cyril? I mean, anyway. The PRC, the DBSA, and the RDC have all pledged 660 million to fund green hydrogen projects in South Africa. Well, Cyril says that hydrogen is essential for energy independence and economic revival. So what's the chances that he's actually going to pull off this green hydrogen bull rubbish? Well, and he's on nothing. It's just happened. That's 660 million that they pledged to fund for these projects, and we all know that's going in some cater's back pocket. But you see, one of the problems of the high-risk perception environment, the barriers to entry that Cyril's highlighting, is caused by the ANC. Because everybody knows where the ANC gets their hands involved, they steal the money and they don't actually deliver. And that's exactly what's going to happen here. Many such situations of these. But you know, it's really, really disappointing. Cyril is just the worst president the Republic has ever had. We are constantly seeing a doubling down of these old narratives. Evidence is continually mounting up of policy failures and elite enrichment. It's continual. And yet, here we are. Same things again. Blame APARTHEID. What we're also seeing is that there is a deepening geopolitical tension around the state of Israel, with the state of Israel basically being isolated now by many European countries that are showing forms of Islamist overtake. So what you can see, even in Europe, is that population replacement appears to be leading to potential policy shifts. It's very interesting to see. In case these are all my opinions, do let me know what you think in the comment section below. Until tomorrow, bye.
We were informed about UK decision to include 2 of our ministers on the British sanctions list. It is outrageous that elected representatives and members of the government are subjected to this kind of measures. I discussed it earlier today with Prime Minister Netanyahu, and we will hold a special government meeting early next week to decide on our response to this unacceptable decision.
El execrable atentado del 7 de octubre incluyó entre sus víctimas fatales a 27 ciudadanos argentinos y también a 21 secuestrados. Seguimos demandando la devolución incondicional de los 4 argentinos aún en cautiverio, Ethan Orón, Ariel y David Cunio y Lior Riudaf, y de la totalidad de los secuestrados en poder de la organización terrorista Hamas. Israel, en su rechazo a la rendición cobarde frente al terrorismo, es hoy un faro que ilumina el camino de la libertad y el compromiso con la civilización. La Argentina, desde su propio lugar y con su propia gesta en defensa de la libertad, pretende también echar luz en la misma dirección. El futuro necesita de nuestra colaboración para expandir la luz y alejar a las tinieblas. No desistiremos en nuestra demanda por la liberación incondicional de todos los secuestrados aún cautivos en la Franja de Gaza, así como insistimos en acompañar al pueblo de Israel durante estos años trágicos. Agradezco la generosa invitación de los mandatarios israelíes y confío en que esta visita marcará un antes y un después en el fortalecimiento de la amistad entre la Argentina e Israel. Que Dios bendiga a Israel, que Dios bendiga a los argentinos y que las fuerzas del cielo nos acompañen. ¡Viva la libertad, carajo!